it's Sam, and I'm talking to you today about Mercury in Gemini. When Mercury is in Gemini, it's in its own sign, as Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and of course this will bring the power of that planet and the attributes of that sign into a very high level and a high function. And, this is because the signs get their attributes from the planets that rule them. Gemini is not just a sign, it's the masculine external quality of Mercury. So when you get the planet in its own sign like this, those qualities of it become very enhanced. They become quite powerful and readily available to be used toward that end. So when you see someone, let's say in a natal chart, who has Mercury in Gemini, their mind will be very fast and, relatively speaking, to a sort of baseline functionality, be pretty accurate, be able to handle a lot of information and handle it correctly, categorize things correctly, be able to speak somewhat accurately, and also be able to understand the appropriate usage of words and language and how to perhaps even influence others through their words. So, in other words, the qualities of that planet and that sign become a great skill. Now, that skill can be used for benefit or detriment as well, sort of based on the nature of that planet for that ascendant. So, for example, if Mercury for a certain sign is a functional malefic, let's say, like for Mars-ruled people, or even the Moon, Cancer, or even Jupiter-ruled people, where it's somewhat ambiguous, then those words might be coercive. They might be used to manipulate, for example. And even for, in any situation, if it's modified toward a difficult, in a difficult way, like join Mars or other kinds of things, then the language and those skills can be used for benefit or detriment. That's a different consideration. But again, when you get the planets in the signs they rule, they become very powerful to at least fulfill the terms and the conditions in that chart. So, in general, though, you would see that Mercury in Gemini brings a lot of power, and when it's a transit in the sky, it's a great time for us to explore what we're curious about, focus on things that we're interested in, develop our skills, and have a high level of benefit in doing those things, regardless of where Mercury is in your natal chart. For example, let's say Mercury is difficult for you in your natal chart. It's not something that you do very well. When Mercury goes through Gemini, it'll be a time where, even relative to your baseline of, efficacy with Mercury, you'll be able to do it very well at that time. You'll be able to speak more clearly at that time. You'll be able to understand your thoughts, comprehend your thoughts, put your ideas into words and all of that much better when Mercury goes through Gemini at that time. Again, if Mercury is very developed in your natal chart, then it'll be even more. It'll be a time when you can really think clearly. You'll be able to organize things really well, speak very clearly, and whatnot. So this is how we can understand transits in general when they go through different signs relative to our baseline. Like in our chart, it gives more depth and power and skill, or more detriment if it goes through a sign where the planet is in difficulty. So Mercury in Gemini, very much about the power of Mercury, especially externalized through language, speech, communication, technology, and filtering through the miasma of details and being able to categorize and organize those details in the best way for us. And again, Mercury is like that voice in your head. It's interpreting your life. It's so important, right? What you tell yourself about what things mean, and the meaning that you derive from things, comes from Mercury. Certain things happen in our life, and then we have a story about it. Oh, it was this. And we get that story right or wrong all the time, interpreting what happens. Many times our interpretations are based on our past, and oh, that person looked at me funny. Oh, they don't like me, and our, oh, blah, blah, blah. This whole kind of thing goes, this story goes in our head. That's Mercury. And again, when Mercury's powerful, we have more neutrality around that. We're not as emotional about it. Mercury doesn't do so well in water and fire signs in general because they're very passionate, they're very opinionated if it's fire, very emotional if it's water, and we get stuck in some emotional thing about life experiences, or we get very strong opinions. It's better in earth, which is more practical and slow, or air, which is more flexible and curious and neutral. So this is a natal chart generality, and so this is what Mercury does, is it gives us that discrimination to be able to think clearly, right? That's what intelligence is the ability to clearly think about what happens and clearly distinguish, not just be programmed. So again, relative to whatever our, efficacy is and however well we use that energy in our life, when Mercury goes through Gemini as a transit in the sky, Mercury going through Gemini gives us more clarity at that time relative to our baseline. We might only be able to think this high, barely think our way out of a wet paper bag most of the time. But if that's our level of proficiency, then when Mercury goes through Gemini, it'll be about up to that standard. If our standard is up here, like, if Mercury's already very powerful and we have a lot of discrimination and efficacy and use with language, then when Mercury goes through Gemini, it's very high. So this is the way planets operate when they're in their own signs, and that's how Mercury in Gemini winds up being when it goes through in transit through Gemini, a great time for language, learning, understanding, comprehension. And when it's in a natal chart, Mercury in Gemini also gives those qualities naturally to the person in abundance. So they actually become a teacher of Mercury-type things. A great interpreter, writer, speaker, even artist, and one who can translate life experiences into language, words, and other sort of media.